Hello, everyone, and welcome back to MetroConnect USA, and welcome to the FTTH and Demand Zone Digital Infrastructure discussion. I am delighted to introduce you to this fantastic panel of fantastic panelists. Before going on to do so, I just want to give a quick thank you to all of our sponsors who have made this event possible. So thank you to our gold sponsors, Everstream, Nexusguard, and Zenfi, our sponsors, Colony Capital, Digital Colony, Houlihan Lokey, Schneider Electric, and Zayo, and of course, all of our associate sponsors. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to your moderator here. We've got James Henry, who's the Senior Managing Director of Bank Street. So James, I hand over to you to kick off the discussion.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. I guess good afternoon to those of you across the pond. We are delighted to have assembled a great group of panelists today, including executives from a handful of the leading fiber to the home players in the US, as well as folks from Mox and Nexusguard that represent important ingredients in the overall digital infrastructure ecosystem and the core network, as well as security side. I'm going to make a couple of brief introductory comments just to frame the opportunity around fiber to the home, and then we'll dive right into introductions of the panelists and the question and answer session. So Georgia, if you could jump right to the FTTH sector dashboard, I'll take it from there. Great. So I think in many respects, I expect to be preaching to the converted on this. Certainly those folks on the panel are believers. But I think for the benefit of the broader group, I think it's instructive to provide some perspective on the overall opportunity. What is, I think, attracting huge interest in fiber to the home as an asset class globally is the sheer size of the market, coupled with what is a clearly defined unmet need from existing infrastructure. So in the US, 140 million US housing units, massive in size, obviously, as a market, 1 million new units added annually, which is not huge percentage growth, but to put things in context, that's like adding a brand new Cable One or a brand new MediaCom every single year. That's like $5 billion of potential enterprise value rolling off the conveyor belt every year. Broadband adoption is a great catalyst as well. It's strikingly low today compared to other countries, but expected to grow from 76% at the end of last year to 90% over the next decade. I think we're all acutely aware of the factors that are driving demand for bandwidth at home, whether it's what we're doing here and now, streaming over the top services, video conferencing and collaboration, gaming, which is latency sensitive. And it's not just demanding more and more bandwidth, it's also demanding symmetry to the connections and lower latency or lower ping. So these are all phenomenal catalysts that are driving demand for higher bandwidth, and in turn driving demand for fiber as the preferred access medium to deliver the highest quality and most reliable symmetrical services. Just jumping to the following page, Georgia. We think it is instructive to look at what's driving this. We all experience it individually as consumers now, but we track the OpenVault Broadband Insight Report quarterly, and it's amazing to see just the sheer volume of usage. 452 gigs of downstream usage per month per household across the US. If you look at some of the public disclosure from the cable MSOs like Charter, for example, or Altice USA, they talk about 600 gigs per month from cord cutters, customers who are taking only internet service. So that figure continues to grow. And of course, the number of connected devices, the number of streaming services, these are all factors that are creating more demand, not just for capacity, but also symmetry and low latency. One thing I would just highlight before we leave this page is that many people talk about mobile wireless or 5G as a solution. Think about 452 gigs or 600 gigs per month in usage per device versus mobile, which is 15 gigs per month of data consumption on average. So it's like literally 40-fold greater. And you tend to think that fiber or HFC, some terrestrial access medium, has an edge there. The following page, just in brief, highlights how far behind the US is compared to many developed countries. That's in large measure because cable has done such a fantastic job with DOCSIS, current DOCSIS 3.1, delivering, I guess a gig or what looks like a gig, and allowing them to really benefit against the incumbent telcos from a competitive perspective. But where the telcos have deployed fiber, or where independent operators like Allo, Greenlight, Ting, among others, have deployed fiber, they're winning. They're winning against telcos, they're winning against cable, and I think that's a big part of what we're going to talk about here. Last slide before we jump to the discussion is just highlighting the flood of capital that has recognized this opportunity, the fiber to the home opportunity, as a generational bet, and has been put to work in a variety of platforms. What's interesting about this is it's not just fiber to the home pure plays like a GoNetspeed or Race or Gateway or i3 or Allo for that matter. It's also the telco transformation thesis, buying an incumbent telephone company and overbuilding it or overlaying that network with fiber, fixed wireless, or in building with Sail Internet or Aereo. So clearly a market of this sheer size and scale is going to attract a lot of capital, and there are a lot of different strategies to allow that to play out. And I think with that, it's a pretty good segue into the panel itself. So Georgia, if you'd like to pull down the slide, I'm going to have, I think, each of the panelists just introduce themselves very briefly, and then we'll get into the to the meat of the discussion. But I think if we go, I guess, alphabetically by company, start with Brad Moline at Allo and go down the line from there.
Hi, I'm Brad Moline. I founded Allo in 2003, and we offer fiber services primarily in Nebraska and Colorado and a little bit in Texas.
Great. Mark Murphy, Greenlight.
He is after A. I'm Mark Murphy, founder and CEO of Greenlight Networks. We started the company 10 years ago. Greenlight is a pure play fiber to the home company, offering the fastest internet service in New York State to residential customers, MDUs, and small businesses. And we were actually, we had a family office come in, Tom Golisano's family office, the founder of Paychex, back in 2018. And so working with Tom for the last few years to really grow the business into a platform and really a construction machine, much like Brad has done at Allo and John Sinelli has done at MetroNet, certainly a few years behind those folks, but they blaze a great trail that we're following behind.
Great. Justin?
Justin Melnikoff, the president and COO of Mox Networks. We've been in business here for just almost 8 years. Building net new long haul and partnering with public-private partnerships and municipalities here, both in the United States and in Japan.
Great. Zen?
Xenophon Giannis. I run sales for Nexusguard. We're a DDoS mitigation platform. We focus on providing turnkey service to ISPs, CSPs, and any service provider against network attacks, DDoS attacks. Prior to that, I've been doing this for about 6 years, but prior to that, I was 10 years at AboveNet, so very familiar with the fiber, deploying fiber networks and what it takes to get that accomplished. So looking forward to the panel.
Great. And last but not least, Elliot.
Mute.
Apologies. I'm Elliot Noss with Ting Internet, and Ting is a division of Two Cows, public company, TCX. We're in a few businesses, but on the fiber side, we have been operating and building our own fiber since about 2014. A lot of us at Two Cows have our roots in the old dial-up ISP space, and we've been through 3 or 4 different markets and businesses before being able to kind of come back to our native space as we get to participate with these other folks in in the coax to fiber transition that is taking place now, and I think is still underappreciated.
Great. Well, let's dive in with questions. I think the opportunity for fiber to the home, Elliot, I think you would, say is perhaps still not fully appreciated, but many of us are living and breathing it every day. There's a huge factor driving it around unmet need from consumers. There's aging infrastructure. Not everybody has access to cable. So there's, fantastic drivers that we think are creating what is really a generational need for an upgrade to the overall networks. But let's, I think let's start at the beginning. Brad, curious, looking back, what prompted you to start Allo? I think it's fair to say fiber to the home was probably a crazy idea in 2003. And curious how you've seen the business evolve and importantly, market demand evolve for your services over the past, 15 plus years.
Yeah, I guess we first worked together in the late 90s, so that might date me a little bit. But what I really thought about in 2003, and we really started offering services in 2005, we were focused just on business for the first, 5, 6, 7 years, and dominating small to mid-sized business, even a little bit into the enterprise with fiber. And I can remember, when you start a company, you're also sometimes a salesperson as well, meeting with a hospital, and they had a reference hospital that they needed to connect to. And I spent probably 4 months off and on talking to the CIO of the hospital to explain why a 10 meg symmetric service was better than a T1. And then finally they had a true need. And actually what we had to do is just leave up 2 ports and say, hey, plug them in when you ever get around to it and it'll prove itself. Well, times have changed a little bit. And so in 2010, 2011, IPTV was figured out. And we also figured out that we were getting 50, 60, 70% market shares in business, and we would need to defend them. And so we changed our model then to really become fiber to the prem, or fiber to the home. And what changed then was really driven by TV. 85%, I think, of our customers took linear TV at that time. Well, now it's completely changed, and now it's the gigabit society. When we moved, close to 3,500 people home in Lincoln between us and our parent company and some sister companies, all in 4 days. Well, now you figured out what the ecosystem really did, because the VPNs that people were going into their core business never hit the internet. They were getting 4 or 5 millisecond services and those types of things. And that's how it's morphed. So I'd love to say that I knew what I was talking about back in 2005, but the business has changed and changed. I also said I'd never have more than 50 employees. Because I was tired of having big companies, but we have about 600 now. And so it's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
And, Mark, as I think you have maybe some similar heritage, similar experience to Brad, coming from the telco side of the business. I think as you looked at standing up Greenlight in Rochester, curious, in that market, and as you look at expansion markets, how do you think about screening criteria? From our experience, market selection is so important to success. And just curious, is it economic factors, demographic, competition, perhaps all of the above? But it'd be good to hear, your perspective on your home market of Rochester, what kind of drove that move, and then what filters you apply for new markets that you can consider.
Sure, and the biggest thing for us, and we started right around the same time that Google was getting going with their fiber business down in Kansas City, and had an opportunity to spend some time with them. And our model is similar to theirs from the standpoint of customer demand is really what drives our network deployments and helps us determine where we're going, certainly in the initial days. So we've got hundreds of thousands of customers across New York State that have gone to our website signed up to let us know that they're very interested in getting service, and it's a very grassroots effort, generally speaking, and it was that way to start. I think now we've evolved it into being able to incorporate that information along with what we see on in what we sometimes drive and what's just happening organically on search and social media, as we look at places that we think are going to make sense for us. Then we overlay that with, in addition to our own analytics, now we look at who the competition is in the market. Generally speaking, if there is another fiber-based provider in the market, we're not going to go there. And historically, it's been competing with Charter, Frontier, and Verizon DSL in the markets that we're going to. We look at the municipalities themselves. How easy or challenging is it going to be for us to do work there? And do we already have the required rights-of-way permits to get through those cities to do our underground work if that's necessary? How easy or challenging it might be to work with the city to do that? If there's existing fiber that we may be able to leverage, and Google's certainly done some of that more recently, but we'll look for opportunities to defray some of our costs using either private or public fiber that might be available. And then the other big one is getting fair and reasonable access to the utility poles. How difficult is it going to be to work with the utilities in those markets? And what we've certainly found is that that's going to be a key driver in how quickly we can deploy in any given marketplace. And then lastly, as you would expect, things like density and the amount of aerial versus underground are going to play into our cost of construction. Although recently, I would say over the last few years, we've gotten much better at building underground, and it's far more competitive than what it used to be relative to building aerially. And then you don't have to deal with the delays caused by getting licenses to be on the poles and dealing with the utility companies. So those are I think, generally the things that we're looking at when we do market selection.
Got it. No, that's helpful. And pivoting to you, Elliot, I think I guess if there's anything to add around how you look at market screening as you have a number of markets across the U.S. where you've planted flags as opposed to focusing on a specific region, and then it would be great to hear your thoughts on build cost, kind of the unit economics of the model as you're building out. I think you've identified nearly 150,000 serviceable addresses per your Ting fiber build scorecard, which we follow regularly. But it'd be good to hear kind of what the economic experience has been across that.
Sure, and I think really that Mark did a great job of laying out market selection. I will note that I think for all of us, there's more supply than demand. There are more cities and towns that want fiber than there are people with construction capacity to build it. And we're pretty transparent about our core metrics. We talk about $1,500 or so to pass a home, another couple few hundred to connect the home. People sort of draw their line between build and connect, sometimes differently, but most people's numbers are in the same places. And we talk about 20% take in the first year and 50% take after 5 years. Those were a set of assumptions that we originally developed in 2014, and they've kind of held as we've built out. We've modified them and the way that we tell the story a little bit over that time, but not very much. And so you really have just the core math, the basic IRRs. We combine that with about $1,000 a year in gross margin per subscriber, and it's a pretty good operating story. Now, one of the places where we have seen some variations, we feel like we're experiencing, and this is just relative to traditional telecom, not relative to other people on the panel at all, but we are seeing, no surprise, just fantastic net operating margins in these fiber businesses. You really see benefits. One of the things that has always amazed me with the copper and coax networks is they'll report EBITDA, but they'll have, 15 to 20% of revenue go into maintenance CapEx, which to me is OpEx. I mean, the accounting or tax treatment of that money is kind of irrelevant. And, when you compare that to 2 or 3% in fiber, you're immediately picking up, kind of a 12, 15% net cash margin benefit. That's before you get to better OpEx, simply because they're generally fresh platforms, they're more efficient, et cetera. So we see these very significant net margin benefits relative to kind of traditional telecom, and then we'll see how that plays out as this coax to fiber transition continues.
And when you consider the amount of bandwidth that's being generated from these markets, it's really stunning, right? 600 gigs out of a home, or a gig throughput out of a home. It doesn't take much to overwhelm the core network infrastructure, right? If I think of the quintessential audience at MetroConnect, it's commercial fiber with the large metro and long haul operators who are now seeing a step function increase in demand for their services, not just in major markets like New York City, but in markets like Lincoln, Nebraska, for example, where Brad is, or Rochester or Syracuse. So pivoting, I think, to Justin, Mox has built phenomenal networks on a long haul basis, connecting certain core geographies with the big internet hubs. So Justin, curious for you to weigh in on what you're seeing as a result of this kind of extraordinary growth in demand for bandwidth out of markets both large and small.
James, I think you're totally correct in seeing kind of the growth trajectory that you mentioned there, both large communities and small. We've seen companies coming in and even asking for net new ROADM drops or net new routes to be built that are either diverse or entirely new, or having added capacity growth that is just grossly accelerated. I think where we thought the world was even going to be here in what was 2020 and now 2021, I think we've even looked and seen that demand set now growing to where we thought the world might be 12 and 24 months from today. And I don't think it's going to slow down, whether it's being driven by the shift to home, as well as the shift to continually connecting more internet drain sites and continuing to build out even more of those that may have been a tier 2 market is slowly creeping into becoming maybe a tier 1A, where just continually accelerated demand sets. The amount of capacity, whether it's both regional and national, that we have today is just not cutting it. So I think there's going to be great opportunity, not just for companies like us, but a lot of other companies out there to continue to build net new routes that help connect a lot of these new demand locations.
And just to pull on that thread a little more, Justin, that's going from like a Lincoln, Nebraska to the nearest IP drain point or what have you, or are there other destinations along the way that are going to be critical for those networks to serve?
Yeah, I think there will be new destinations along those routes, that'll need to get served, and I think those are opportunities that are going to be driven by people that are on this panel, as well as what we all see in the marketplace within the OTT community, new data center locations that are going to come up, states that want to come out and have new programs and tax incentives, or power institutions that want to help drive data center communities, if you will, to certain locales. And we'll start to see those becoming new internet drain sites. And those will then need connectivity to the traditional Chicago, Atlanta, Ashburn, Seattle, if you will. And we'll continue to grow and expand that in this country as we start to segment and make those internet sites into smaller geographies, if you will.
And clearly, getting backhaul from markets both large and small is becoming a potentially key choke point or key issue that's going to be addressed by the core network developers, both metro and long haul. I think at the other end of the spectrum, this burgeoning growth, and especially over-the-top applications and the like are creating, new issues and challenges from a security perspective within customers' premises. So, Zen, I'm curious from your standpoint at Nexusguard. You serve a lot of operators. Curious what you're seeing around long haul bandwidth, denial of service attacks, perimeter security. And how have you worked with your customers and relationships to address some of the issues that are being presented?
Yeah, sure, James. Well, I mean, 2020 was a big shift from the business address to the home address, right? And the benefit of fiber to the home, and well, there's two trends we see, right? We see the fiber to the home where fiber is unlimited bandwidth, right? I mean, it can scale, for the next, let's say 50, 100 years, it's got the bandwidth that everyone needs. As the technology gets better. The other piece that's really filled the gap is that the wireless, the last mile wireless folks that where you can't get fiber, their equipment has gotten cheaper and more reliable and larger bandwidth as well. So you're seeing a big growth in both of those where they're providing a lot of connectivity. What happens though is everyone's building all this capacity, and you talk about OTT and what's going on within the home, right? There's tons of devices that are in the home. You've got all this stuff being streamed. You've got regular internet, and every device that's connected to the internet brings in another possibility of a back end, security breach, so on and so forth. One of the main ones we see for DDoS is the gaming, right? So a lot of the whether it's the kids or just in general, I mean, now even the parents are all doing gaming. A lot of they DDoS each other. I guess it's kind of a thing, but whereas a 15-year-old kid can DDoS his buddy offline, it could be a 1 gig or a 10 gig attack, which will take out we've seen that what happens is it'll take out the neighborhood router that takes out so you have fiber to the home, but the internet that's being delivered gets taken out. So you get an outage down the entire block. And really it's, a lot of these regional ISPs, especially the wireless ones and the neighbor ones, they're not ready. They weren't prepared for that, right? Because, residential customers aren't usually a target, but it's, as the bandwidth increases everywhere, so does the DDoS attacks, because DDoS is just based off of compromised devices. So they're stealing your bandwidth to use against other people, right? So, even when the cell phones gets compromised, that you get 5G, well, you got 5G you can direct at somebody. So the challenge is, and you've noticed a lot of these regional ISPs, they've been massively forklift upgrading the routers in the neighborhoods, right? Because who's at home now? All these executives that were in the business parks, they're now at home, and they're demanding a higher level of service and support, and they want SLAs. So, and I don't think that's going to change, right? So I think that as things go on, you're going to see more twofold, right? It's the DDoS attacks, and then it's also the malicious intrusions, right? I mean, even one of the other trends that we've seen is that the devices that the fiber to the home providers are using as the gateways, those are found to be being shipped from the manufacturer with security flaws in them, backdoors, and passwords that that hackers can get into. I think one of them, CData, is a provider of those devices that a lot of folks use. They white label them, this, that, and the other. They're wide open. So they just kind of 3 months ago got there was a big to do about how open those devices are, and the fiber to home providers don't know that they're buying it from the manufacturer. They're expecting it to be secure. So that's the challenge, right? How do you secure all this bandwidth into the house?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're going to be a significantly and rapidly evolving set of threats. It doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, that's for sure. Just reflecting further on kind of challenges in kind of in and around the core network, Brad, curious from your standpoint, as you think about some of the secondary, tertiary, perhaps rural markets that you're serving, are you able to get enough, bandwidth to these markets to drive, connectivity back to the big IP drain points? So, I mean, like, Lincoln, I've mentioned, that's one of your larger markets, but some of the smaller markets, is there enough capacity there to get terabits potentially over time that you'll need?
There really is, and we've partnered with groups like Great Plains and Optic and some others to handle the transport across Nebraska and other names in Colorado. But that's actually one of the key focuses that we have on if we're going into a market. My belief is any municipality from 2,000 to 2 million needs fiber to the prem. So if you have that thought process, then it's hey, can we be connected? And there was some great leadership, at least in the state of Nebraska. There's a group called Network Nebraska that, gosh, 20 years ago, started pushing fiber into every school. And that actually led the process in Nebraska because all the incumbents built. So we've got great connectivity. People are continuing to add bandwidth and great leadership. And then we've been able to access some very good drains from both Omaha and Denver that we offload our traffic. And so whether it's somebody needs a 10 gig service from a call center in Western Nebraska to San Antonio, or it's just standard use, it's been relatively easy to get in both Nebraska and Colorado, the markets that we're in. And we do a ton of caching and other things to make it more efficient. But it really hasn't been a meaningful problem, except for, let's say, when we went to Breckenridge, Colorado. That was a real problem. And we did some public-private partnerships as well as work with some incumbents for transport.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that. As I can understand why it would be an important screening criteria. It's all well and good to build fiber up and down the street, but if you can't get back to the content, that you're going to be highly challenged in your ability to deliver an attractive offering. And I think it's a good maybe segue into one of the biggest drivers of demand for fiber to the home, which of course is over the top video. And Mark, I'm curious from a Greenlight perspective, what have you seen kind of on the over the top demand side? Have you had to take steps to shore up the network or provide more backhaul to the key internet drain points in order to accommodate that?
Well, first, to address over the top adoption, what that's really allowed us to do is not feel like we need to offer a more traditional cable TV service because there's so many devices out there now and so many great services, and the user interface keep improving. So, we see a lot of our demand from the get-go was driven by the amount of streaming that's going on. And as I would say, a newer entrant, we didn't have to deal with some legacy issues that other providers may have to deal with. But, and for our customer base that we go after, if the customer is calling asking how to use their clicker, they're probably not a great customer for us. But that demographic is changing and improving. Relative to the impact to the network, I think like many, when the pandemic hit, we saw about a 30% increase in peak bandwidth on our network. That hasn't changed. And the bulk of that continues to be over the top video. So to deal with that, kind of like Brad was saying, we leverage peering relationships, CDN devices to offload traffic, but the cost of 100 gigabit interfaces continues to drop, and we've been able to, I think, give favorable pricing to continue to grow bandwidth at the core, and working with our vendors that, to get that traffic around our network. Everything from day one was nearly 100 gigabit interfaces. And then in terms of access networks, we've been also working pretty closely with our vendors on XGS-PON deployments, which will allow us to get up to 10 gigabits per subscriber. Right now, we offer a service up to 2 gigabits per subscriber, which is the fastest in the state. And so, in terms of over-the-top video, we're more than happy to have it on our network, and I think we've got great ways to deal with it.
And Elliot, reflecting on Ting Fiber's experience, curious if you share that view, the same views as Mark, and do you feel the need to offer a linear video product, or you feel like there's enough demand for a true, internet only over the top offering? Elliot, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. We spent a couple of years trying to build an over-the-top offering. We felt like it was going to be necessary to sort of push more easily, from the high 30s, low 40s up towards 50 and beyond. That iceberg was melting as we were going along. We also found the technology in that space quite terrible. And with the pandemic, that was the final nail in the coffin. I was thrilled to be able to put a bullet in the head of our offering, take a $1 or $2 million write down and move on to simply supporting OTT. I think that there's no question that the linear video business is not a great one to be in, and sort of why build up that problem. I would note, though, we spend a lot more time thinking about work from home because that's what's driving symmetry, and symmetry is what's pressing the coax network harder and harder. So I think that once you can accept that the circuits are cheap and plentiful, I'm very interested in Justin's comments. I feel like I'd like to spend 10 minutes asking him questions. But I'm thrilled to be a customer on that side of the business and not a supplier. As long as that's the case, OTT doesn't really make us breathe hard. I mean, I think that while we did see growth during the pandemic, we saw much more growth in the breadth of the peak as opposed to the size of the peak. So you now simply you sat at peak for a lot longer period of time, which, is just actually more efficient use of the network and, doesn't necessarily necessitate extra backhaul.
Yep. And Zen, just pulling a little further on the topic of over the top, unlike, cable linear TV is effectively a walled garden, a closed loop, no security issues. You talked earlier about the fact that every new device, every new service in the home, opens the door to a potential new threat. So just curious what you're doing, for your customers, your carrier relationships, to help address those issues and allow them to, solve their customers, the end user challenges, because that's ultimately, customers are going to look to their service provider as the primary point of contact around any breach or incursion in their home.
Right. And well, and that you hit the nail on the head. It's like, whose responsibility is it, right? Whose responsibility is the security? The consumer is going to look to the ISP, but the ISP is just providing the network, right? So besides DDoS, right, one of the other solutions that we provide is application protection. And what's, streaming TV and over the top services, those are just applications. So, the question is how are you protecting them? And because whereas DDoS is a problem, I think the the bigger threat is the malware coming in and embedding itself within the home network, which doesn't have an IT department that's looking at it all the time and running security checks and things like that. So it becomes a green field for planting, any kind of viruses or things like that. When you say like OTT, where it's kind of like shop yourself for whatever service you want, there's tons of third-party internet IPTV services, right? You can get international channels, you can get this, and before you used to need the set-top box, now you don't. You can just an app on your Fire TV or whatever it is. And along with that, because you can, well, I wouldn't say jailbreak, but you can, whatever they call it, where you can just side load any kind of app you want onto these sticks, and that's just as insecure as if you download, along with that, you don't know what you're letting in, right? But most of the consumers aren't aware of that. And so, but to the ISP, they're just monitoring the network traffic, the router. So to them, it's still TV traffic. They don't know what's going along with it. I think that there's going to be a convergence on, like I said, what the solution is. Because right now, if you do a search right now, you have, the security folks are marketing to the fiber to the home people, and they're basically saying, look, you're going to put this device in, and it's going to give you a firewall and help them to a point. And then they're also marketing directly to the consumers. They're saying, if you go, all the Netgear and all these different ones, they have their own kind of firewall for your IoT environment, right? And there's no standard, right? They don't talk to each other. Nobody knows if it's working. The consumers are buying out of fear, so they're just buying it and putting it in and hoping it works. But yeah, as we've gone away from like you said, the walled garden of the triple play or the cable company or what, how it was in the past. Yeah, with that freedom, there's a lot of a risk involved that sooner or later there's going to have to be some kind of standard that comes and protects the consumer, because as Mark said, if they don't know how to use their clicker, they're not going to know how to run a scan for viruses, right? So, I mean, it's the same problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But just to round out on the OTT topic, the over-the-top community, whether it's or in hyperscale operators like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Netflix, all those have driven so much demand for core network capacity, as well as data center connectivity. We're seeing lots of business plans now for folks who want to go build brand new bespoke routes. And Justin, that's obviously core business for you at Mox, and just curious how you think about this opportunity. Are they long haul systems that were largely built 20 plus years ago now? Are they going to run out of gas or run out of capacity and really need that kind of forklift upgrade that people are talking about?
Yeah, I would totally agree that they need a forklift upgrade, not just from the fact that they're aging, but the newest and latest and greatest technology from, pick your vendor out there is really geared toward this brand new glass. Whether somebody's looking at taking a model that's more related to subsea technology and trying to run that coast to coast and push more terabits down the same pair of fiber, or if they're going to do it in a more distributed fashion and run just the latest and greatest Sienna, Infinera, pick your flavor, they're really going to certainly look at that net new glass and how we can get that loss coefficient to match what their product set's going to be. And we're not seeing that out of the older product, let alone the fact that, once the fiber's been in the ground, it's degrading. It's been spliced or hit, 60, 70, 80 times, however much it's been. You start to see that loss where now you're having to amplify it more often, and the cost model is just being broken. So we're really seeing not only the net driver for the OTTs, but a lot of other subset of customers as well, even down to the cable MSO market and well beyond, even into some of the US government and so forth, that those aging networks are not performing up to the standards that they require or that they want for the next 20 years. when they take the long-term approach. So I think, certainly there's a lot of companies out there, not just us, that is well positioned to help grow and build those next level routes. I think it's going to really take an entire family of companies to go out there and do that. I know the guys here were talking earlier about you can't build every city and municipality. It won't be just one company out there doing it. There aren't enough construction crews per se to go do those things. It's going to take that same kind of family to develop the long haul network again in this country. And everybody's going to go need to build a couple different routes to support specific initiatives that I think everybody can really get behind, whether it's, government cable, OTT, wireless, cell providers, and so forth. I think there's a lot of demand set there. Those business cases you talked about, I think OTT provides a great source of revenue in terms of what they want to go do, but them being the sole source and opportunity to go build a route for one specific customer, I don't think is necessarily something that probably works today. I think a lot of those companies and others are at the scale where they can go do it themselves and don't need somebody else to do it if the route is that important to them. Then I think that goes without saying. It's not just in the long haul community. That goes for metro, long haul, regional, that those folks have the expertise to go do things themselves in-house and can go provide that bandwidth they need for themselves without tapping others. It starts to get into the really difficult, expensive routes where you start to look at saying, let's build a consortium, if you will, of customers who can all come together, pay their fair share, and allow everybody to then benefit off of that. And I think that benefits the fiber to the home and the fiber to the prem community as well, because a lot of these routes are going to be built brand new, diverse, whether it's what we've done through some areas in the Midwest and in Ohio and in other places that have never had fiber connectivity coming through their backyards. Now there's opportunities for backhaul through these areas where people can build the offshoots, go serve those communities. And, we love partnering with folks like the guys that are on this panel to help support those kind of growth initiatives on those communities that have never had an opportunity to have fiber built.
Great. Yeah, we had a question from the audience, which is actually a good segue into the experience that the fiber to the home operators have had in going to market and penetrating. I think it would be great to start with Brad and kind of hear how your penetration results have been over time, and importantly, as you look at different cohorts of markets, how much has that varied? Are there some markets that have ingredients for success or not? And we note that as your parent company Nelnet reports publicly, I think you talked about 143,000 passings in the past, maybe 57,000 customers or residential customers. Yeah, that's big. That's 39% penetration across an entire set of markets, many of which are presumably not fully developed or fully penetrated. So curious to have you talk about the kind of penetration experience and where do you see things topping out over a multi-year period?
Well, it really goes to your strategy. We have a ubiquitous build, all customers, low income, high income, single family, MDU, all forms of government, small business, and enterprise business. We expect anybody that our fiber passes should be a customer. So that drives our overall market shares a little higher. It takes a unique culture, and I think some of our heritage as a business fiber provider helps us get there. But it has been kind of interesting. You do various forms of capital raises over the years, and we get in debate sometimes between me and you on what is going to be the market share, and it was 35% or 32%, I think it was. And where's your break even? And then it became 38%, and now kind of the standard almost anybody will sign up to is 42%. But internally, we expect between 50 and 60% residential penetration right now. But our products are evolving, and some of the government programs, I think a big source of our growth will be with the lower income groups as we're finally waking up as a society that says we've got to solve the digital divide, not just rural and urban, but also high income and low income. And so I think we're going to have a nice pickup there. And then we expect the businesses to be a little bit higher than that, in the 60, 70%. And it's interesting whether it's a town of 1,600 or a town of 300,000. the numbers kind of work the same. But it's important that you're serving the school to help the students, you're serving the state and local government to help the residents, hospitals related to their patients. And that entire ecosystem is how you get up in that 60s and 70s. And that's where our oldest markets are. We've never been an incumbent, everything's been competitive. And so that's how we look at it. Hosted Wi-Fi, those types of things. Basically 100% of our residential service is hosted Wi-Fi. Today, a new customer will that gets our half gig or gig service will only get a Wi-Fi 6 router. Always looking towards the future, always making it so. Why would they switch?
Yeah, and I think those stunning penetration results really speak to the importance of market selection and competitive selection, right? You're not going to get 60, 70% of the market if you're going up against the best and brightest of cable or incumbent telco fiber, I presume.
Yeah.
But in some of the markets you've targeted, and obviously a lot of markets around the US are either underserved or completely unserved by legitimate broadband alternatives. Mark, from a Greenlight perspective, your private company, so presumably will not speak specifically to market penetration, but curious, our belief is that you're probably seeing similar traction in the market, and curious what you're seeing from a competitive response. I mean, you go toe to toe every day against Charter Spectrum in Rochester, the old Time Warner system there, Frontier, which has a lot of copper. A lot of DSL, probably not a lot of fiber, but just curious, you're taking their customers every day. What do you see in response, if anything?
Charter recently did a 200 megabit offering across the state, which they had announced as part of their merger conditions with the Time Warner deal. So that's, we've seen them continue to increase their speeds, and that's at their $75 product level. Which still puts them about 50% more than us and 60% slower than our standard $50 500 by 500 product. We have seen for a few years now that they'll have new customer offerings specifically targeted in places that we're building or we intend to build. But again, that's only going to be a new customer offering. And I think, over time, customers get very frustrated with the fact that, no matter how hard they try now, they can't get access to those types of pricing. So once they come over and get a service like we offer, or Brad or Elliot, I think they get a much better level of service. They get a much better speed. They get, and we provide a lot of value with what we're offering. So, as Brad just said, I think if you provide them with a very good service that's fairly priced, they're not going to leave you. And from a churn perspective, and we talk about this a lot, it's kind of an interesting question, because the majority of our churn that we've seen happens at the beginning and the end of the month, and is consistent with people moving. And within a few months, that household has a new person living in it with our service. And generally speaking, the homeowners and the property managers have been actively marketing those properties as having our service. So the people coming know they can get it, they sign up for it, they take the service. And so, I think to Brett's point, you provide a really great service and don't give people a reason to leave, they're not going to leave.
Yeah, and over to you, Elliot, curious about your experience. You have, as compared to Allo and Greenlight, who have fairly focused regional concentration, you have 11 markets across the US, 8 owned infrastructure, 3 open access. Just curious, are you seeing a different experience in terms of the competitive response, penetration results? Does that vary from an open access network to a direct retail network that you control?
The places we are seeing variation, and let me be more specific, the only places where we're seeing deviation from that kind of 2050 model is where there have been reasons that the build has been unnecessarily delayed. I think that I felt, James, it was interesting. Brad called out that you and he have been talking about this market share issue for years. Then he said something that I deeply agree with. And then I feel like you didn't hear it. He said, hey, this is infrastructure. I'm paraphrasing. So, Brad, please correct me if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly. Hey, this is infrastructure. We're under the mistaken view that this is a premium service. This is for everyone. My words now, we've retrofit copper and coax networks to serve the internet. Fiber is the first purpose-built infrastructure. Betting on people using more and better bandwidth is the long-term bet. That feels pretty solid to me. Brad called that out specifically and talked about some of those great results. And then you responded to him by saying, yeah, that clearly shows market selection is so important. And I heard him say, hey, longer term, it ain't that important. There should be fiber in places where there's 2,000 people. Every market we're in has a coax gig, with one exception. That does not impact our take rates. Certainly where there isn't that coax gig, it helps the less competition. But I think for all of us that are operating today, we're operating, with two core concepts underneath. One, that it's just a better mousetrap, and that the trend favors that better mousetrap. And two, that belongs everywhere. Not in just cherry-picked markets. And those two insights, I think, I wouldn't even call them insights, I think they're revealed truths, are so powerful, and why I go back to, why this coax to fiber transition is still, despite the attention, being underestimated.
Well, good. Well, we're down to the lightning round here, the last two or 3 minutes. So we're gonna mix it up a little bit. Zen, just curious, we've talked about fiber, and I think we all have at least, if not a theological belief, some sort of belief that fiber is the right answer. But there's a lot of talk about fixed wireless, satellite, Starlink. As a reformed fiber guy, and a guy who's active, talking to companies across this ecosystem. Just curious, if you have a view on Zen on where fixed wireless and satellite fits into the mix. So if we can do 1 minute from you, and then I'll round up with a final question for Justin.
I don't look at those as alternatives to fiber. I look at them as like complements to, just like everyone was saying here. I mean, it costs money to build the fiber networks, and that's not getting cheaper. And you have to have, the numbers have to be there for the return. So, in most of these cities where we have big broadband, you go 5 miles out and people are still on dial-up. So, the fixed wireless meets that need. Because like I said, they're getting cheaper and better broadband. The satellite, we'll see. I mean, all my wireless friends tell me that the satellite's a lot more fluff than actual, that it's going to work the way Elon and everyone says it will. So we'll see on that. But like Hughes has been the standard for, but you're getting 50 megs there. But as well, what you're seeing is that like in these markets where you have one fiber provider, like not just to the home, but like let's say to the business, the hospitals, they all have to do a backup, a wireless connection, because there could be a fiber cut, right? Fiber can still get cut. So you have the banks, the government agencies, things like that. You'll see them augment with a wireless connection. And really, so what it comes down to is, how do they all play together? And then what we're seeing with some of the wireless providers is, how are they stacking services on top of the connectivity, right? It's like, okay, I'm giving you the connection. Here's the bandwidth. Oh, by the way, here's SD-WAN on top of it. Here's cloud on top of it. Here's DDoS. Here's perimeter security. And that just raises the ARPU, right? More value-added bandwidth is what they're trying to do. And that's what we're kind of seeing. But I think that's happening on both sides. I think that also the fiber providers will be going that route too, because they want to get more revenue.
Good. And just to wrap up with you, Justin, your Mox is obviously an arms merchant. You're selling, high bandwidth connectivity and transport to companies across the ecosystem, including presumably satellite and fixed wireless players. Just curious, do you view this as complementary solutions or competitive, or some combination thereof?
No, we view it as complementary. Of course, we're personally in the fiber business, so we'd love to see everything on fiber. And to Zen's point as well, kind of having wireless as a backup. But we really view it as complementary, as so many of these wireless applications still at some point all tie back to the fiber, no matter what it is, if it's a base station or if it's a fixed wireless item on the side of a building. All of them are connecting back some way, some shape or form back to the fiber. And we're using that fiber to go back to the internet drain site in whatever the closest location city is. So for us, everybody is a utilizing factor of the fiber. We're all seeing that as going to be this next level generational item in the fourth utility, and how we're going to continue to grow that, not just in a metro city environment, but really on a global scale.
Well, with that, I think we are at the end of our appointed time. I will thank all of our panelists for participating. And Georgia, put it back to you for any wrap-up comments or to make the handoff to the next session.
Great. Thank you so much, James, for moderating. And thank you, Mark, Justin, Brad, Zen, and Elliot for participating and making it a really great panel. We've got one more session before we wrap on virtual MetroConnect USA. So head over to the live agenda page to watch that. And for everyone, thank you for watching. Have a good rest of the day.
Very good. Thank you.